Chuck Olynyk. I'm a reenactor. For 36 years, I used historical reenactment in the classroom in order to engage my students and hook them into the subject and make them think that history is far cooler than simply looking at the back of the book and identifying the famous dead people. And I wanted them to experience living, breathing cultures. So to that end, I would show up in garb for whatever time period we were covering, and I would have the appropriate music playing in the background, so essentially there was a soundtrack to history. And I would expose them to the art. I'd bring in artifacts for them to handle, but I'm not in the classroom anymore. So I'm repurposing myself, and what I'm involved in right now is a very pretentious sounding mission Odyssey, where I use the garb that I've got at the house, that I've collected over 36 years, plus bringing in that passion that I have for bringing the past to life, which is why I'm involved in historical reenactment on the weekends. I have a desire to preserve landmarks before they go away. I also like to play history detective and kind of connect the dots. And on this mission Odyssey, I'm visiting each of the sites of Alta California in garb and telling the stories of these places. So I'm visiting the missions, I'm visiting the assistencias when I can find them. Those are the spin-off missions that were supposed to grow up to be full-fledged missions on their own. I'm visiting the estancias, or looking for them, and there's very few of those because most of them are paved over and have townhouses on them. And I'm visiting the presidios, the fortifications designed to protect the missions, telling the stories of each of these places. Well, what I'm doing today is I'm visiting the 4th Presidio that was built in Alta California by the Spanish. Actually, it's the 4th one I'm visiting, and that would be El Presidio Real de San Francisco. And I hope you stick with me on my journey. The Spanish had been exploring the Pacific coast for quite a while. In 1542, 50 years after Columbus wandered into the New World, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo sailed north, and he was exploring the California coast. And I've told his story before of finding a bay he named San Miguel, which later became the San Diego Bay. He named a bunch of sites on the way up. He sailed probably as far north as the Russian River, but did not manage to see San Francisco Bay because of the treacherous conditions and probably fog. He didn't sail close enough to actually see it. So he'd be the first of many that would end up missing this. English buccaneering activities along the Pacific coast and around California led to some urgency as far as, the Spanish trying to find a good port. One of the more interesting figures that was cruising around California was Sir Francis Drake. He may have stopped and anchored over at a bay that's north of San Francisco Bay called Drake's Bay. But because of people like this, the Spanish were very interested in securing their territory. In 1595, sailing back from Manila, Sebastian Rodriguez Sarmeño ended up hitting Drake's Bay, camped there, and missed San Francisco Bay, probably also because of weather conditions. And in 1602, Sebastian Vizcaíno, who came and tried to explore in a very systematic way, sailing up the coast, was charting everything, he's naming everything. By the way, he has Cabrillo's old logbook, and he's just renaming everything, and his names are actually going to stick. Well, he ends up sailing along the coast. He is also going to be one of those explorers that misses San Francisco Bay. The person that's going to find it is going to be Portola. The person who does get credit for discovering San Francisco Bay is Portola. During his expedition of exploration in 1769, when he was really supposed to be looking for Monterey Bay, I already talked about this. He marched north from San Diego with a large party of soldados de guerra and pioneros, and he stares at Monterey Bay, thinks that he missed it based on trying to compare it to a description from Vizcaíno's pilot's log, and moves on north and stumbles across San Francisco Bay and turns back. Portola was not impressed with San Francisco Bay. To him, it was simply a series of channels and small bays. He didn't get the big picture, even though his Sergeant Ortega was sent out to explore around, and Ortega came back and said, "This is really big." All Portola saw was it was an obstacle to further exploration, and he, as a matter of fact, wrote, "There's nothing worth describing up here." 6 years later, the Spanish are beginning to figure out this is kind of a big deal, and Juan Manuel de Ayala ends up sailing in on a ship called the San Carlos, and he explores the bay a bit, and his pilot made a very detailed map of the area. And now what's going to end up happening is 8 months later, you're going to have the De Anza expedition come through, and the site is going to get selected for Presidio and a mission, because now the Spanish government is starting to see this is important and they need to safeguard this port, especially because Britain has been exploring around, and there's word of Russia exploring around, and the Spanish want to lay claim to the area. On March 28, 1776, El Presidio Real de San Francisco, the Royal Presidio of San Francisco, gets established. And it doesn't actually get built yet, but it gets established. And De Anza turns south. He's going back, and he's going to leave his second in command, Moraga, in charge. And Moraga's job is to help create the Presidio, but he's also there with Padre Paulo and Padre Cambon, and they are going to establish Mission San Francisco de Asís, which most people are going to call Mission Dolores later. And so Moraga's time is taken up doing that. So on June 29th, the mission is established and some construction begins. And the reason that the construction starts to take place is the land expedition. They're waiting for supplies. Most of the supplies are on another ship that's called the San Carlos, and it's supposed to bring up the supplies, and these guys are waiting around. Nah, you know what, it's going to take a while, because predictably when the land expedition and the sea expedition would be going up California, the land expedition tended to get there first. So they just went ahead and they started laying out the mission. Well, a month after that, so it's like the end of July, Moraga now heads back and begins construction of the Presidio. And the Presidio doesn't come into an actual physical existence until September 17th. Oh, I ought to be used to this by now. Looks like I'm coming back to the Presidio at San Francisco. I hope you stick with me.